We're going to come to you now.
Back in Chicago. Nice to have you with us this evening. And I want to go back. I want to go to our Republicans because earlier in the broadcast we talked about what the president, the tweets involving the squad, and how that has become a big story over the last couple of days, or several days. And there was something that I was thinking about midweek. And Cory Booker, who's running for president, was on television today, and he basically said that the president's remarks reminded him of the George Wallace campaign. Now, David, you're a fairly young man, but I think you might remember at least part of the George Wallace campaign.
Yeah.
And the George Wallace campaign was in 1968 when he ran. The bumper sticker was America, love it or leave it. Now, how does that differ from what the president is trying to articulate right now? Isn't this campaign somewhat, as Cory Booker suggests, somewhat reminiscent of the George Wallace campaign and appeal of 1968?
Bruce, I suppose you could create some kind of ideological connections, but it would very different times, different contexts, but a somewhat similar theme, you might say. I think the question is, what is the intent behind those remarks? I mean, in the context of a national campaign at that time, what George Wallace was doing, we were in the throes of the civil rights movement having achieved some significant victories, and there was incredible social upheaval, and I think he was reflecting that in the same way that there's pushback against some of the changes that have occurred in America over the last 5 to 10 years on the social front. But, I think that ideologically, if you're asking me, is there some connection between those two campaign themes, or if that's what they are, perhaps. But I think that we need to do some deeper dives into what is going on here, and what are they trying to achieve.
Is there some similarity between these two appeals to the voters, Jim?
So here's the similarity. Look, we have billions of people in this world that would love to get here, and millions of them are coming, right? Because where are they coming here? Because we're the greatest country God gifted on this earth.
Right.
We have individual liberty. We have a constitution that protects our individuality and our individual rights and treats everybody fair under that constitution if we're applying the rule of law and we're applying it equally, right?
Right. If
And,
we're
and
supposed to,
we know that there were things in our past that were bad, right? And we had to correct those, but we had the tools in our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution to fix it. And that's what it's all about. And so the love it or leave it's kind of like, if you don't like what we have, go find it somewhere else. Is it in Venezuela? Look what's going on down there.
Venezuela?
They're running people out of the country. People are being hurt and abused by what's going on when you apply that kind of government control, run the companies, run the markets, run the capital, and everyone in the government gets to do that, but people can't do that?
But the essence of what George Wallace was saying was, this is a simple way for you to respond. This is a simple bumper sticker for you to respond to anyone who is saying things which they perceive to be against the United States.
Yes.
Okay? And number two is you had, because it was in the wake of the civil rights movement, you had African Americans then who were perceived by some as someone that's going to take their job. And that's why whites used to be, they used to scare tactics with whites that a black was going to take their job.
Yeah, but Bruce, let's not forget too that the love it or leave it was also directly related to the Vietnam War and protests by people who objected to U.S. policy.
It was a collective appeal. I mean, it was an umbrella under which a lot of people went to. It was simple. It was a bumper sticker. So whether it's that or go back to your country, I'm just saying is there a similarity there? Because the other thing which a lot of people don't remember, in the general election of 1968, George Wallace won the white male vote. It wasn't Richard Nixon.
He won several states. He won He won like 5.
He won some states, but I'm just saying the number one, more white men voted for George Wallace in 1968 than Richard Nixon or Hubert Humphrey. So that appeal, which is 50 years ago, that appeal might still have some appeal today. Only the difference is it could be other people.
Yeah,
Other people who may be brown.
Yeah,
Other people that
I
may
don't know.
be.
I'm not buying it. I was actually 5 years old in 1968.
Okay.
But I remember something about that election. There was little chance, and this is kind of tells you how politics integrates with social life. I was in grade school, and they had a little chant: Nixon, Nixon, he's our man. Wallace, Humphrey, and the garbage can. So that was the
Yeah,
chant, right?
okay,
And I
that's cute.
remember
I
that.
never heard that.
And but it was on the playground. I was 5 years old. I don't know why I still remember it. But so, and Nixon was the guy that won, right? He was the guy that was against that, whatever Wallace was running on. And I
Right.
had no idea that that was Wallace's slogan at the time.
Well, he had a Southern strategy too. I mean, it wasn't,
Yeah.
That's not black and white. It's not like Richard Nixon wasn't
Yeah.
playing on those fears
Yeah.
too.
I had
That's
a,
what,
I
that's
had a
what
bumper
changed our
sticker
politics.
from that year, and not produced by the candidates, but it said, Archie Bunker, in your heart, you know he's right.
I have seen
remember?
that one.
Okay, let's look ahead to 2020. What, in your view, I think I know the answer to this, Anthony, but what, in your view, is the one single issue that will rally more people to the Democratic Party to vote for a Democrat socialist who you hope will be Bernie Sanders? What is it?
I think it's Medicare for all. I do think it's Medicare for all, and I believe it's also a Green New Deal. I think, right now millions of Americans are drowning in debt right now. They understand that the government has been working for the ultra-rich, for millionaires, for billionaires, for corporations for far too long. And right now, people are struggling with student debt. They're struggling with, medical bills. They're struggling working 2 and 3 jobs a day. They want economic justice, and people want Medicare for all. They want health care that is guaranteed. They want dental care. They want eye vision. They want to live life
Who
comfortably.
will pay for it?
The millionaires and billionaires and the American people, but mainly we're going
For about 30 days if you took all of their money.
We're going to put this bill to Wall Street, to millionaires and billionaires like Bill Gates, like Elon Musk, like Warren Buffett, people, the Walton family, people, the 3 richest people in the United States own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans. So when we talk about who's going to pay for things, it's going to be Wall Street and it's going to be the billionaires.
If Bernie Sanders is elected,
Yes.
there's going to be a lot of people that believe exactly what you've said, that
Yeah.
everything that Bernie Sanders wants to do, he's going to get done.
Sure.
There were a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump.
Yes.
They're seeing every single day that many of the things that Donald Trump wanted to do, he couldn't do.
Right.
He had a Republican Congress.
Right.
He could get immigration reform.
so
So my
I
question to
love
you
it.
is
One
not
second,
only
Jim.
not only do you need Bernie Sanders to get
Right.
elected, you need a majority of Congress to get elected.
Yes.
And you
Super
believe,
majority in the Senate.
And do you believe that will happen?
I think it's a matter of power, right? I think what we need to do
It's a
is
matter of
rally-
attaining power.
Yes,
How do you do
is.
it?
And I think we mobilize millions of Americans. We mobilize millions of working people to put pressure on their congressmen, on their senators. We're not going to win every single House seat. We're not going to win every single Senate seat. But what we are going to do is we're going to bring the working class and we're going to pressure legislators to say, we want Medicare for all. We're going to we have a popular demand. We know we need people who need housing. We need people who have education for free. And we know we need to fight climate change. And we're going to demand that.
Okay.
And we're going to do that by organizing
When
millions
we
of
come
people.
back, I want to hear from Jim Martyr, who wants to be in that Congress.
Yeah.
That's right.
Because he's going to be standing there with his back to the door, fighting against this challenge. I'm Bruce DuMont, back shortly from Chicago.
Thank you.
How this was that's how this whole thing was designed.
Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Before we continue, the debate schedule for later this month on the 30th and 31st of July has been announced by CNN. And on the first day, we're going to take a look at those that are going to be debating on Tuesday, the 30th of July. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Beto O'Rourke, Amy Klobuchar, John Delaney, Tim Ryan, John Hickenlooper, Pete Buttigieg, Marianne Williamson, and Steve Bullock. So it's going to be interesting. You're going to have Warren and Bernie Sanders, clawing at each other. And I think that you're also going to be looking at the way in which Beto O'Rourke and Pete Buttigieg go after each other, because Buttigieg appears to have a leg up in that battle between the two of them, and the rest are going to have to find some way to really break into that news cycle. Also, the very next day, on Wednesday the 31st, Joe Biden will be there. Kamala Harris, That'll be a rematch between those two. Julian Castro, who also had a very strong debate a couple of weeks ago, he will be in that debate, as well as Andrew Yang and Cory Booker, who's trying to hang on for dear life. Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington. Kirsten Gillibrand, also trying to hang on for dear life. Tulsi Gabbard will be there, Michael Bennett, and Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City. So again, two more battles coming up. David?
Can I say one quick thing
Sure.
about that? And it is important which candidates are going to appear on stage together,
Sure.
who's going to debate whom. But I have to say, this is another example of that infotainment
The
disease.
draw,
The
dumbest
draw-
thing
the-
I've
the
ever
seg-
seen.
The segment that CNN did on this, it
An
was
hour.
sort of,
You mean an
it was
hour
like
program?
this NFL
Yeah.
draft
Hour
style.
program.
It was absolutely ludicrous, and that's the kind of thing that, to me, that's not journalism. For goodness sake, they could have done the draw and then announced the results. And they
It's a
they
digital
wanted-
story.
It's
It's a
a
little
they had to go out of their way to
All
show how
right.
transparent they were.
Okay.
It was just silly.
So
I
can
wanna
we
go-
get
I
some
wanna-
substance here?
I want to go back to Jim, because Jim Anthony was describing what he thought how life could be much better if Bernie Sanders wins and he
Yes.
gets a majority,
Yes.
somehow gets a majority in Congress. If you are successful and you go and take the oath next January, you will
Right.
be standing in the way of those things. So, as a newbie, again, let's just look ahead. As a freshman in Congress, what is going to be the prime issue that you want voters in the 14th district to know about?
So here's the deal, and let's tee it off with the Green New Deal and Medicare for All. So I studied economics at Purdue University, and I only remember one phrase from my bachelor's degree down there, and it was from this class: there's no such thing as a free lunch. So we have free Medicare for all. We have free health care. We have free dental. We don't even get that today, right? You gotta work for it. You gotta pay for it. What working people want is they want the policies that they have, that they were promised they're going to keep those policies and not lose their doctor and not lose their insurance. When I started, I worked for the corporate world, and then I went into business on my own, bought private insurance in the formerly free private insurance market. There's a big difference between healthcare and insurance, by the way. $6,000, family of four, for 4 kids, family of 6 in 2002. Fast forward to 2010, now we're about 8,000 right before the passage of Obamacare. Today, for my wife and myself and one adult child, we're paying 30 grand a year. That is not affordable. 30 million people were affected. Oh, by the way, it didn't just hit us in the private insurance market and the small business world. It hit every working person. Because guess what? Ask anyone this. I ask them this all the time, and they all say, "Oh yeah, did your co-pays go up? Did your deductibles go up? Did your out-of-pocket that you had to pay to your employer to cover your insurance go?" Yes, you all got whacked. The Unaffordable Care Act. That's what we got. And you want to give it over to the guys that gave us the Unaffordable Care Act. No Republican voted for it. And you want to turn Medicare for all, which they stole from Medicare, by the way, to fund Obamacare. So how are we going to do that, folks? Where's the money going to come from? It doesn't grow on trees. And what happens, like they do in Illinois, JB and Madigan, guess what? They tax the working folks. They give you cigarette tax. They give you bag taxes. They give double your gas tax. They put 500% increase on some of the vehicle fees, like trailers and stuff. Right?
Anthony says, and the left would say, the way you get the money is you tax the rich more.
Right.
I'm
I'm not talking about taxing
you
working
can
people here. I'm
tax
talking about Wall
the
Street.
rich, and in 30 days there would be no more rich. If you tax them 100%, we're all gone. You can't do it.
Great.
It doesn't work. And guess what?
They would
don't
be all
need
You know
billionaires.
what? The other thing I learned in economics: corporations don't pay taxes. People do. You pay him, I pay him, he pays.
If we had a
it
fair
all
tax
comes
system,
back to
if we
some
had a
prices
fair
in the
tax
market.
system, if the rich were paying their fair share, there wouldn't be the amount of billionaires that there are today. If working people were not enslaved in paying taxes over and over
The amount
again,
of billionaires
and
there are
if
today
tax
because we
breaks
have a
weren't
free
given-
market. That's
if
how
tax
it works,
breaks weren't
folks.
given out like free candy on Halloween to the rich and to the billionaires and millionaires, we wouldn't be living in the system. You wouldn't have to be paying $13,000 or $30,000 for your health care insurance.
No, that is a tax. Sorry,
Right, so-
that was
Go
the
ahead.
largest tax increase in American history, folks. When you did Obamacare, look at the numbers they had to
Right.
get there. That's
And
what it is.
I'm
They
not-
turned
I'm
into
not here
taxes on
advocating
medical
for-
devices, direct
Anthony,
taxes on insurance companies, and other
my
things.
question,
So-
my question to you is, if you did away with the millionaires, you just said get rid of the millionaires, get rid of the billionaires. If they wave a magic wand, they're all gone. Who invests in corporations that make things, that hire people? Where does that piece of the economic system come from if you don't have people that are willing to invest money to improve not only their own portfolio, but to improve the country? Where does it come from?
I think
If
this
everybody
is-
was making $85,000 a year, where would it come
That's not
from?
the argument. The argument is
Will
about
you tell me?
The argument is about democratizing our economy. Right now, we have an economy that is in the hands of the very few, right? It's in the hands of corporate boards, it's in the hands of Wall Street. What I'm saying is we need more control. Workers need more control over our economy. We need fast unionization efforts.
So who's in charge of your paycheck? I just
Yeah.
want to know that. If you're not in charge of your paycheck and what money you get to spend, who is?
Well,
that's the
and
free
Anthony, let me-
market. That's what we live in here
when
today,
we have
right?
a collective and cooperative economy that is based off of the mutual benefit of all people.
Tell me one
and not-
country
and
where
not
that's
ex-
worked in human history.
Well,
I'd
that's-
like to know
that's
the
what-
example.
that's what-
Which
that's
country
what this
is
movement
it?
is building. That's
Well,
what this
we're going to
movement
do
is
it
building.
here, but it's never been done
Well-
anywhere else before. Socialism, fascism, communism has been tried,
there-
and
there have
everywhere
been- there have been
tyranny
countries-
happening.
there ha-
Tyranny happens. Dictators rise, and people basically.
And that's
yes.
horrible. And now, and
horrible.
And there
We're
have
talking
been
about
instances,
hundreds of millions
there
of
have
people
been instances,
that-
there have
One
been
at a time.
instances in human
Yes.
history where people have come together and they have collectively taken
And you can
control
do
of
that
their
in a
economy.
free market capitalistic
And
society.
no, that
You're
you
welcome
can't.
to do that
No,
with
you
your
can't.
friends and
No,
your
you
your
can't. No,
community.
you can't when you're
anytime you
working
want.
3
Yes, you
jobs
are.
a day. No, you can't when you're living in poverty. You have no options to do that. You have to work to live. Maybe that's something you don't understand, but that's something that I understand.
Well, look,
and I don't have no
well,
freedom
well,
in this economy,
well,
and
well,
nor
look.
does my community.
Look.
So that's what we're fighting
One
for.
at a time, Jim.
Look, I've been working to live since I was 16. So I've been in the working world my entire life. And, I'm happy to work. And so are people out there. They're happy to
Right.
work. They want to
And
people want to
there are
work.
homeless
And-
people. There are people without homes right now who are working, and they don't have the luxury of buying into the economy
Look,
or of controlling the economy.
Nobody's
That
arguing
is-
we should be taking care of folks that need some help and a lift up. But you don't do that by tearing down the people that are
Michael,
that are wealthy.
Michael
So you
Golden,
just
how
don't
do you?
that.
I want you
Stolen
to,
wages
Michael. I
and
want you to
they've
weigh in
stolen
on this
taxes.
debate.
Well, you wouldn't like my answer because it's sort of in the middle. It's
Go
sort of-
ahead.
There you go.
You can, Michael,
Yeah.
you can be in the middle.
Can I ask Jim a question though? Related?
Of course you can.
Jim, because you're running for Congress, so I have a question. All the Republicans, every single one of them who opposed President Obama in 2009 doing a stimulus when people forget the world and the country were on the brink of collapse. I don't understand why they're all against that, but that the tax cut that cost even more under Trump. David was talking about intellectual honesty. Can't we acknowledge that actually we spent more on a tax cut than Obama spent to try to jumpstart and avoid a depression? Why is that tax cut
Well,
okay?
I'm
I don't get it.
confused how a tax cut, which comes out of my wallet, is spending.
What?
Okay, I'm confused
Of course, it's
how
spending.
a tax.
It's
No,
money
look,
out of the budget. It's money out of the
government-
federal
the
budget,
government
Jim.
needs to-
No,
look,
the
we-
country's going
One at a
bankrupt.
time,
It's
let
money
Jim
out of the
respond.
budget.
Right.
Well, let's establish
Let's
our
take
terms
some
here.
things out of the budget then,
Spending
right?
taxes,
So-
returning
Michael,
taxes
let
are
the man
spending.
Taxes are
speak.
what comes out of everyone's wallet right here in this room.
Right, and the country
that is not
and the
spending,
country
folks.
spends it
That is
either
not
on
spending.
programs or defense
So when Obama
or
had
tax
his stimulus,
cuts.
where were those shovel-ready jobs? Because they didn't spend it
That's
on building
not
things.
the
big- well,
question. That's not the question.
But that was the example you used.
I said.
What do we spend it on?
Are you kidding?
anyone even
First of
know?
all, there were tax cuts in that package. There were a ton of tax cuts that never for middle class families in the Obama stimulus. Go check it.
I'm a middle-class family. I didn't see any
Well,
tax
I don't
cut
know
in
what
the
income
stimulus.
bracket you are, but
But-
that's a fact. We're not.
Yes.
You can laugh about it. We're
Yeah.
talking about facts. That's a fact. And there was a ton of investment in infrastructure and all kinds of things. But even if it was for nothing, even if it was all tax cuts, let's say it was all tax cuts, why is that not okay? But Trump and the Republicans, when they have power, that okay?
So
Why?
I want to know what people do
Well,
with a
what
tax
can
cut.
you
Let's
answer that
let
question?
Jim, let's
so
let
if
Jim
people-
respond.
Intellectual
So you know
honesty.
what happens when you get a tax cut? You have more
That's
money
not
to
my
spend in
question.
the economy.
It's not my
That
question.
generates jobs.
It's not my question.
Michael,
Yes,
would
it
you let the
does.
man speak?
Yeah.
It's being very
Yeah.
rude. Let the man
Yeah.
speak. You've had your diatribe. Let him speak.
Look, tax
pointless.
cuts are for us. That's the government is taking about 39% in the top bracket, right, and or 35%. But look at it. When we originally instituted that back in 1916,
Jim, I'm
I
not
believe
making
it
the
was.
argument against
Look,
tax
they
cuts.
said
I'm
the
saying
top
why
rate
is
was
it
gonna be
okay for
9%,
Trump
right?
and not Obama? Why is it okay for Trump and not Obama to spend it out of the federal treasury, and now we have near $1 trillion deficit just since Trump took over?
Look,
why is that okay?
I would love
Why
to
is
get
that okay?
there and then start cutting spending. If that's what you're advocating for, I'm 100%
Why is
with
it
you.
okay for
Send
Trump
me
to
there
spend?
so we can
I'm
we
talking
can
about
cut
Trump
spending.
spending.
David, I want to
It's a
get you
total
in.
avoidance of the
David,
question.
I
Jeff.
think we can have a rational conversation about how to address the healthcare needs in this country, which are significant, or how to address the issue of income inequality and other pressing issues. But we're never going to be able to do that if we're going to continue to vilify people with whom we disagree, and to use inflammatory rhetoric like people being enslaved. The other thing is, I have to flat out disagree with you about one of the great features of this country is the fact that the economic system we have allows people to create great wealth out of very meager beginnings, and we've seen so many examples of that.
We got a break.
And to vilify people who have
Got
been
a break.
successful, I think is denigrating one of the great genius
Back shortly.
aspects of our.
Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Thank you very much for joining us. As you know, if you're a longtime listener to this program, we have been very involved in watching the development of the First Step Act. And we've been talking about it for a number of years. This is part of the criminal justice reform that is sweeping both Republicans and Democrats. It's one of the few things that has happened in Washington, D.C., and it brings together those who are liberal, left of center, and those that are right of center. Not only the Koch brothers, but the ACLU and a lot of other groups. And so it was unique when it was passed recently and signed by the President of the United States, Jared Kushner. His son-in-law has been basically the chief quarterback for that project. And we've done a lot of conversations about it. And last week, as part of the rollout of this First Step Act, was the announcement by the Bureau of Prisons that 3,100 federal prisoners will soon be released, and they're going back into the population. And again, their sentences have been reduced. And joining us now to sort of bring us up to date on what's happening is John Kufis. John is the National Director for Reentry Public Policy at the Texas Public Policy Institute. He joins us from Washington, D.C. And John, thank you for joining us on Beyond the Beltway tonight.
Thanks for having me. Good evening.
Good. I'd like to begin, first of all, by determining, we should mention to the audience that when we talk about this prison reform and the First Step Act, it is for federal prisoners. It has nothing to do with state penal policy, rather. But of the 3,100 people that will soon be released, how are those people being determined?
So the 3,100 that have just come out are because of a good time recalculation provision within the First Step Act. Now, prior to that, about 1,000 or 1,200 folks were released under the sections of the First Step Act that corrected things like the crack cocaine disparity, compassionate release, etc. So the folks you're seeing now are folks who earned this good behavior time for many, many years of their sentence, but due to an anomaly in the BOP's calculation method, just weren't let out. So those retroactive recalculations are being done, and they're going to come out to the community. Now, it's important to know that the estimates are about 900 to 1,000 of those individuals are going to be released to other detainers, say mostly ICE detainers, and if another state wants that person. So not all 3,100 will hit the street because some may be here illegally.
And those that are being that are illegal, they will be released to ICE, and ICE, we will assume, will deport them.
Well, what happens is an ICE detainer goes in right away when a person who's undocumented enters the federal prison system, which means if you have a detainer from any jurisdiction, you can't leave unless that jurisdiction agrees to get you or resolves a detainer. ICE detainers trump all other detainers and are automatic. So a person cannot go anywhere except into ICE custody if ICE has a detainer on them. And then the ICE process then plays out.
Now, at the basis of this issue, which the president has articulated, is that he wants to make sure that people that are getting out of prison are trained and have an opportunity to get a job, to become productive citizens. And in the past, certainly at the state level, the number of the recidivist rate, which is the rate of people that go back into prisons, is very, very high. It is significantly less in the federal system. But what is being done since this act has been signed? It's only a few months old. What has been done in the Bureau of Prisons to make those that are going to be released more likely to be employable by someone?
Sure. Well, the VOP took the step of starting something called the Ready to Work Initiative as a direct response to the First Step Act. What the Ready to Work Initiative does is it provides employers an opportunity to plug right into the prison labor pool, which really comes in pre-release prison labor pool. So an employer can now, through this great initiative, call the BOP and say, you know, we're going to need some heavy machinery operators. Who do you have coming back to the District of New Jersey that has these qualifications? And contacts can be made right away. So that's today's issue. And then what happens is the BOP is expanding their vocational programming, expanding their educational programming to match in-demand jobs in regions. So you're seeing a great expansion of job training inside the BOP. But the Ready to Work initiative has got people really excited, particularly because big organizations that I have the pleasure of working alongside, like the Society for Human Resources Management, which has about 300 constituents who are HR officers across the country, are partnering with the BOP and the United States Probation Officer to put these people back to work. So it's a tremendous public-private partnership.
Is there a financial incentive for the owner of a business in the United States to become part of this program?
So I don't think there's direct incentives. In other words, there's no dollar amount that I know being offered to employers for this. But I think that, you know, people are starting to see that when you hire the right person who's been in prison, the right returning citizen, you're going to get someone who has, this might be their first opportunity ever. And those are pretty much your most loyal employees. I mean, you're talking about folks that never, ever may have held a 9-to-5 job, never had a chance. So I think that when you partner governmental training with the private sector, you have a real recipe for good results.
Since you obviously, or the BOP knows who is going to be released, has a list been created, the number of states that are most likely to get the first wave of these 3,100 individuals?
Yeah, there are release numbers. I haven't seen them, but they're probably going to they're going to track standard release numbers. So, for example, and one thing your listeners should know is that unlike some state systems like Florida, when you go to prison and you max out, they just open the door and say, "We'll see you later." In the federal system, every inmate is released to supervised release, usually of 3 or 5 years. So everyone's being released to supervision and must comply or go back to prison. So when you're talking about
and
those
that's a parole officer
where inmates are being released to in higher numbers each month, you're talking usually about your Floridas, your Texas, North Carolina, Missouri, California, obviously, is where typically these releases are going.
But again, in this, as you say, there's like a parole officer they've got to report to, and they have a very restrictive list of things how they must conduct themselves. Correct?
That's right. And to be honest, there's been great research from Pew, for example, has the famous study on how recidivism rates are better where there is post-release supervision than where there is not.
Now,
so this is really an exciting time, and this dovetails with another part of the First Step Act, where you're going to see going forward is that inmates that participate in drug treatment, vocational training, they're going to be able to be released to home confinement earlier in their sentence.
John, as someone that's followed this for quite some time, and we should mention you were incarcerated for a while, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But again, you've been working on this issue for several years now. You had a similar position in the state of New Jersey, and now you're working with the Texas Policy Institute, directing their national reentry program. What would you say to an employer, and if there's an employer listening, to the program this evening in the great state of Wisconsin, how would they go about finding jobs that might be available or individuals that might fit criteria that they have, so they can tie themselves into this program?
Sure. I think the easiest way to do it is to contact the United States Probation Office in the district where they are. So in New Jersey, for example, there's only one district. It's in Newark. So if you contact the USPO and you were to say, I'm an employer and I have X amount of positions requiring Y qualifications, can we see who you have? They'll immediately set those up. In addition, the Bureau of Prisons Ready to Work initiative is something that employers, because it's brand new, are starting to tap into. I had the pleasure of bringing a few businesses right to the Ready to Work initiative, and so far they're very happy with the process, and they're vetting candidates right now.
For those who maybe are still suspicious of this program, what would you say to the voter or to the employer that's out there that asks themselves, why should I hire an ex-offender to do a job when maybe there is someone knocking on my door or in my office who wants the job who has never committed a crime?
Well, first and foremost, I think that any business should always hire the best candidate, whoever that is, right? So you're going to have a straight skill situation there. I don't think anyone's asking businesses to hire just for the sake of hiring. But going forward, I think that we have to reframe this issue. And remember that we're all consumers of the criminal justice system, right? Some people went to prison, some people, or most people pay taxes, some people are victims of crimes. And the idea is when we start realizing that we're all consumers of that system, we all have an interest in the solution. And smart justice interventions lead to safer streets, they lead to tax bases that were previously tax drains. And I think that effective reentry protects tomorrow's victims with today's interventions. There's a number of reasons to do it, but a business should never hire someone who's unqualified merely because they went to prison or for any other factor for that matter.
Is your biggest fear that someone who is released is going to commit a crime and it's going to end up on the front page of a newspaper or leading a story on CNN?
No. My biggest fear is that employers don't tap into the programs that are historical right now. This was generational change. But to your point, those Willie Horton situations, they're by far the outlier in situations. And listen, I mean, there is no perfect system on this planet in anything. And I think that, you can find people who have no criminal record and commit horrible crimes. I don't necessarily think that that a person who's committed a crime is automatically going to be more likely to rob your place than someone who is not. In fact, particularly if someone's in treatment, candidly, I'd rather have the person in treatment.
John, hang on 1 second. We've got to pause, and then we'll be back to you. I'm Bruce DuMont. Bruce DuMont back in Chicago, and John Kufis joins us from Washington, D.C. He's the National Director for Reentry at the Texas Public Policy Institute, and one of your colleagues, Mark Levin, has been a frequent guest on this program during the last several years as this has made its way through Congress. And we're doing kind of a progress report since we urged a lot of people to support this and tell their Congress and members of Congress to support this concept. We now want to find out, since it's law, how is it being implemented? And David Cohn is here. He's with the Union League Club of Chicago. He has a question for you, John.
And John, thank you for being part of the conversation tonight. I was fascinated by what you had to say, and where I work, we've been involved in working on criminal justice reform and juvenile justice reform issues for a number of years. And the First Step Act, it's interesting that we've been talking throughout this program about political conflict and ideological conflict. Criminal justice reforms like this are one of the few areas where we've seen Republicans and Democrats come together with common purpose to solve a problem. Here in Illinois, we've been working on some of these issues. We've had some successes. But one of the interesting things that we learned during this work is that Texas really has provided a model in many cases for the nation of how to do this. And I was wondering if you could address the ways that Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals in Texas came together to try and work out these kinds of innovative programs to address infirmities in the criminal justice system.
Sure, sure. And this goes back to about, I think, 2005. I joined the Texas Public Policy Foundation in 2017, but the Texas Miracle is well known. So the government, guys like Jerry Madden, when they were in the legislature, started to respond to the fact that the prison system in Texas was costing, billions of dollars, and there was no rate of return. So it began with a combination of sentencing reform and diversion programs, and that sentencing reform took hold. And where we sit today, Texas has closed 8 prisons, and I think they saved $3 billion, and the crime rate's the lowest it's been since the 60s. So the Texas model works because there's a heavy sentencing reform component in there, and I think the nation is realizing as well is that there has to be a better way here, right? And I think the opioid epidemic really opened people's eyes. Mm-hmm. And what I was saying before the break was that I would rather have a former prisoner who is in treatment than working for me than a person who has committed no crimes but is an opioid addict or some other addict unchecked and then is out on your job sites and falling off of scaffoldings and handling your equipment. So I think that when you put these factors together, we're starting to realize that this is not a left or right issue. It's about doing what's right.
Right. It also brings together different political leaders and different persuasions have different things that really move them. And in this particular case, I think the common denominator is common sense. This is a perfect common sense issue. And again, it really should be supported. This is a great bipartisan thing that's been going on in this country. And again, it should be celebrated more because, as we've discussed in the first part of our program, there's so much gnashing of teeth and hatred that we hear coming out of Washington, D.C. This had an amazing signing ceremony with people that you'd never see probably in the same room. And yet you had liberals that were there. They were concerned about disparity of sentencing and issues that are concerned to the black and brown communities of America. And you had many conservatives there that were looking at they were just saying this is a bad deal. And what I've been saying on this program for many years now is that if you thought that the welfare system in this country was horrible, which ultimately drew both sides together to do something about it, the criminal justice system is equally as bad. And so you've got to look for these common sense things. And again, this is one example of that. That's why, I'm very concerned about, by the way, Jim's got a question, but I want to ask one follow-up. Do you see anything? Obviously, there's a lot of points along the way because this program has many different, points to it. Do you see anything in the future or that's on the horizon, John, that you might think will be a blip and slow this process down in any way?
I think the thing we need is a sworn BOP director. In other words, right now, acting director Hugh Hurwitz does a great job. Has been with the Bureau of Prisons for decades and is a real leader in the field. But right now, he's the acting director of the Bureau of Prisons. So I think when you're trying to implement something on such a large scale as the First Step Act, we're hoping that the Attorney General names a permanent director, whether it's acting director Hurwitz or someone else. We just need someone has to be in that seat who's going to be there and not in an acting capacity so they can fully implement the First Step Act and other reform.
Several months ago, the concern from those within the coalition was whether or not Congress was really going to step up with appropriations. Now, I understand that what the Attorney General said last week is that $75 million has been set aside, at least for the first year. Is that a sufficient amount of money in your view?
I mean, I think that as we're getting the plane to cruising altitude, I haven't run the calculations, but I think $75 million is a great start. And I think that we have to see how the programming takes shape with the risk assessment that was been released. Just the other day, the DOJ released the scientific risk assessment they're going to be using. So we have to examine what programs plug into that properly.
We are out of Jim. You had a quick question. We got 30 seconds for a question.
Well, it was going to be a comment first, but. I like the assessment tracking part. I was curious if Texas had incentives And I share your concern that if there were no incentives in that program, that, is it going to be effective in getting these folks integrated back into society?
That's a good point,
So-
and that's a gentleman who wants to go to Congress, so you may have a friend if he gets there and you keep on the job. John Kufis, thank you very much. Texas Public Policy Institute for bringing us up to date on the First Step Act. Our thanks to Michael Golden and Anthony Joel Quesada and Jim Martyr and also David Cohen for joining us this evening. I'm Bruce DuMont. Good night from Chicago.
All right, Anthony.